The journalist and writer George Monbiot has pointed out that political failure is at heart a failure of imagination, and to trigger imagination we need narrative. Broad political movements all have their own narrative. These narratives have a villain or villains who is the cause of the bad and disorder in the world, and a hero or heroes who will restore or bring about order. Put simply, you can all use all the stats and figures you want, but at the end of the day, it is these stories of good, whatever or whoever that is, versus evil, whatever or whoever that is, that attracts people. A good storyteller will be more popular than a good statistician. Although George was talking about the political narratives of Keynesianism and neoliberalism, which may be too broad to be considered political movements, this dynamic still applies from the smallest of political movements to political movements right across the world. Although a good politician would articulate his views with a strong story or narrative behind it, while standing up for the rights of all people, it doesn't always pan out that way. It goes especially wrong when a politician uses a strong narrative, but quite frankly wants to trample over the rights of certain people. On November 9th, 2016, at 2:45 in the morning, Donald John Trump was projected as the winner of the United States presidential election, becoming president-elect. This followed a campaign of racist and misogynistic lies, along with the usual classism of the Republican Party, but that's a given. Trump was different from the other Republicans. Trump said the quiet part out loud. A lot of Republicans before him had been calling for the exact same policies as him, but it was full of euphemisms. Instead of illegal immigrants and the Democrats being the villains, in his narrative, Trump specifically went after Mexicans, Muslims, Hillary Clinton, and the liberal elite. Trump's narrative was more visceral, no-filter storytelling than the Republicans before him. Long gone were the days of Republicans giving out about illegal immigration when in their heads they were thinking of Mexicans. Trump said the quiet part out loud. He specifically singled out Mexicans in his infamous speech where he said,
"They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good."
He also said that Justice Gonzalo P. Curiel, who was born in Indiana, should be disqualified from deciding cases against him because
"This judge is of Mexican heritage. I'm building a wall."
Long gone were the days of George W. Bush saying that Islam was a religion of peace and Muslims ought to be respected, despite at the same time waging a war in Iraq that killed hundreds of thousands of innocent Muslims and not even apologizing. Trump skipped the looking optically good part and directly attacked Muslims and refugees from Muslim-majority countries. An example of this is an interview Donald Trump did in 2015, in which he says of Syrian refugees, "But if they're here, they have to go back, because we cannot take a chance. You look at the migration, it's young, strong men. We cannot take a chance that the people coming over here are going to be ISIS affiliated." Along with his proposal of sending back Syrian refugees, Trump also had a particularly brutal and disgusting tactic when it came to fighting ISIS in Iraq and Syria.
I would knock the hell out of ISIS. I would hit them, Brian, so hard. You have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families.
He said on Fox and Friends in late 2015. He used the fears of white working class voters and created the impression of global danger of groups that are deemed to pose a challenge to the nation, instead of focusing on improving the material conditions for the working class people, of any color or creed. He engaged in a tactic of divide and conquer, you could say. Trump didn't even do the pretend to care about people part. He just wanted a more visceral narrative in order to whip the people up into a frenzy to support his fake populist movement. Now, that's not to say everyone who voted for Trump did so because of this racist rhetoric. During the campaign, Trump promised to bring manufacturing jobs back to the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt is an area that has suffered significant economic decline and unemployment since the 70s due to outsourcing of jobs to poorer countries. This promise worked, with the states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all going to Trump. This was, in typical right-wing populist fashion, an empty promise, and life for the working class got worse under Trump. Taxes were cut for the very wealthiest in society, while at the same time cuts were made on spending for programs that helped the poorest in that country get by. Along with that, Trump attempted to scrap Obamacare, which was legislation brought in by the Obama administration, hence the name, that led to the healthcare uninsured share of the population roughly halving, through insurers being made to accept all applicants without charging based on pre-existing conditions or demographic status. Betrayal of the working class doesn't even come close to what Trump did and attempted to do. Downright class warfare would probably describe best what Trump did, because, he can't really betray the working class because he wasn't ever a part of the working class. Trump used this formula of using a strong narrative to pull people over to his side, and it worked. Although his presidency was disastrous for the country and even more outright class warfare than before, the tactic of using narrative to expand political movements clearly works, as a lot of those working class people actually voted for him. Probably the worst and most extreme example of this strong use of narrative would be what Hitler did in his rise to power. There was not a shred of truth in what Hitler was saying when he spoke of what the Jews and the communists were doing, but he appealed to the masses through his extreme narrative and public speaking abilities. The political narratives above of Trump and Hitler are extreme examples of a political narrative, with a clear, visceral, and discriminatory good versus evil stories behind them. Who gets to shape these narratives is generally the media, be it a lot less extreme than the narratives of Trump or Hitler. We consume narratives every day in the news, and the news globally is controlled by very powerful and wealthy individuals, like Rupert Murdoch, for example, that, to simplify, use them to keep vested interests happy and expand their power. As seen with Trump, even when narratives outside of the mainstream are pushed, they are often pushed by other incredibly wealthy people that use it in their own nefarious reasons and vested interests. Along with this, as the political movements of Trump or Hitler gain traction, they themselves start to become part of the agenda-setting media, as seen with the shift to the political right of the Republican Party in the United States. However, it doesn't have to be like this. Recently, more and more fully supporter, reader, and viewer-funded media organizations and political campaigns have started to pop up. Grassroots organizations and campaigns like this are incredibly important, as these are generally not run by uber-wealthy individuals, and there are no advertisers to please or vested interests. They are bottom-up rather than top-down run, and therefore will show content, if they're media organizations, or pursue policies, if they're political campaigns, that are truly important to normal working people, in contrast to conventional media outlets or political campaigns that are subservient to private or state power. A good example of this type of grassroots, bottom-up run and supporter-funded political movement would be the Democracy in Europe Movement 2050, or DM25. As it says on the financial transparency page of the DM25 website, DM25 is solely funded by small individual contributions from its members. We receive no grants, subsidies, or corporate donations of any kind. However, the biggest opportunity to counter these narratives of what the agenda-setting media, of which Trump and his ilk is part of now and have been since his victory, is social media and the internet. There was one episode of The Simpsons in which Mr. Burns buys up all of the newspapers in Springfield. The citizens of Springfield, disaffected by this, decided to create their own newspapers to voice their own individual opinions. Mr. Burns eventually accepts that he cannot possibly buy out everyone nor stop people criticizing him, and stops to attempt to create a media monopoly. Nowadays, people don't even need to produce a newspaper or distribute it in order to voice their own individual beliefs to the whole world, never mind the town they live in. Everyone can voice their opinions on social media or the internet. There are many problems with social media and the internet, but there are huge opportunities as well. So, question authority. Don't be afraid to voice your own independent opinions. Create your own narratives based on facts and standing up for the rights of all people. Because now we are all capable of writing our very own newspapers that can be seen in every corner of the globe.